Okay, what you're going to learn in this tutorial here is our player character. The animation sprites will be provided for you in the description. Basically, our character, as the character is out of the water, the character moves at normal speed. The character jumps and falls at normal speed. When the character jumps into the water, though, you can see the character slowly goes down into the water. The character also moves slower while they go through the water. The character can get to the ledge and jump out of the water as well. So this is what you're going to be learning today as you work your way through this tutorial. Hi, this is Ali Arango from Game Visuals as well as littleguy.cgi.com. Today I want to show you how to make working water inside of Gdevelop 5. So let's get started. Okay, when I say working water, what I mean is what I want to show you today is basically you'll have a player, and your player, when they move around on land, the player will move normally, and then when the player jumps into the water that we make, the player will slow down. The player will have a different speed to them than they would have on land. So that's what we're going to be going through today. Now, when we start these projects, or the way I like to start these projects, I like to start from scratch. So here you are looking at the Gdevelop startup screen. So the first thing we're going to do is go to File, and then we're going to select Create a New Project. We're then going to go down to Empty Game, and you can see this says Start a New Game from Scratch. We're going to left click there. Okay, so here we are in our new game. The first thing we need to do is look to where we see scenes. We need to go to this plus. When I click this plus, we're actually going to make a new scene. So I'm going to click that. So here's our new scene right here. So now that we have this, we're going to left click on that new scene. And now we see this objects panel open up over here. I'm going to click here to temporarily take that menu away. If we want to get that back, we can just click right here. So let me click that again. Okay, the first thing we want to do is get our player set up. So I'm going to click the plus button here. I'm going to go to Sprite. And then where we see new objects, I'm going to change this to player. Then I'm going to go to where these sprites are at after I click this plus button here. So now that I click that plus button, I'm going to click this plus button to the left. And then I'm going to go to where the sprites that I have are at, which are here. By the way, these animation frames, I'll put a link to in the description so you can get to these. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to Blockman Idle Frames. I'm going to double click here, and these are the frames I made. I made these frames in Blender if you're interested. I'm going to hold Control. While holding Control, I'm going to press A. That selects all of the frames. I'm then going to click Open to bring in those frames. So now these frames are here for this animation 0. I'm going to name this idle, since these are our idle frames. And this is important right here, by the way. This name is very important. So what I'm going to do now is look to where we see this don't loop. I'm going to click this, so now this animation will loop. I'm then going to click this preview button so we can see there's our animation previewing. I like how that looks, so I'm going to click OK. And then now that we have that idle, we want to bring in our walk frame. So we're going to click this plus button here. We have this animation 1 here. I'm going to click here and type in walk. Now I'm going to go to this plus to the left. And I'm going to bring in those walk frames. So we have these walk frames here. I'm going to hold Control A to select all these frames. I'm then going to click Open. And I want these frames to loop as well. So I'm going to click Don't Loop, which now makes this go to loop. I'm going to click Preview to see. I like how that looks. Now I'm going to click this plus to the right again. Scroll down. I'm going to go to where we see animation 2. I'm going to type in jump. I'm going to click this plus to the left. And now we have these jump animation frames. So I'm going to hold Control, press A, click Open. Now for these jump animation frames, we don't want this to loop. So we're going to leave this as it is. I'm going to click preview. And when you don't have an animation loop, you can just click replay to see your animation. That looks fine. So I'm going to click OK. And then I am going to click apply. Okay, so we have our player set up. There is something that I forgot to do. So I'm going to double click here. And then now we see this properties where we can select properties here as well as behaviors. We want to left click on behaviors. Once I click that, that brought us here. We can see there's this purple outline, or purple underline underneath behaviors. Now we want to click this plus behaviors to go into behaviors. Now we see platform behavior amongst all these other behaviors. We want to left click on platform behavior. All of these controls here are fine. So now we're going to click apply. So now that we have our behavior set up as well as our animation frames still have to be programmed. I'm going to left click and drag this over. I'm rolling my mouse wheel back. The reason why I'm doing this, and this is going to be our work area. So you can see our player is very big. So I'm going to hold shift, go right to this corner. And then while holding shift, I am just scaling him down. And I'll move him over like that. Okay, when you hear me talk about programming, one of the nice things about Gdevelop is it lets us use as little code as possible. So there's a very small amount of code, but almost nothing. Gdevelop is spectacular for artists in regard that pretty much for the most part, you can work, and I think it's set up in a way where you pretty much can figure things out. It's good stuff. Anyway, what we have is our player right here. We need to bring in a ground for the player to stand on. So what we're going to do is go to the right. We're going to click on this plus button here. We're going to left click on sprite. And then we're going to go to where we see a new object. We're going to change this to ground. Okay, one of the nice things about Gdevelop, amongst a lot of nice things about it, is it has a graphic editor built into it. So I'm going to click this plus button here. And now what I'm going to do is go to Edit with Piskel. And this takes us into the graphic editor built inside of Gdevelop. Now I'm going to go to this color right here. I want a brownish color, so I'm going to this yellow here. I'm going to make this a brownish color. I'm now going to click on this paint bucket here. Click here. I'm going to go to New Object. I'm going to name this ground. It's not necessary to name this, by the way. You could leave this what it was and everything would still work fine. I'm going to click save. So now we have this piece of ground right here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to behaviors, and now we see this purple underline underneath the behaviors. Again, we're going to go to this plus to the right, and now we see our list of behaviors. So for these behaviors, we want to go to platform. As far as the default settings, these are good, except I'm going to turn off ledges can be grabbed. And then with that done, I'm going to click apply. So now I'm going to click on this ground, and then I'm going to left click and drag this out onto our scene. I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to this square right here, and I'm just dragging this out. And this button right here allows us to preview. I'm going to click this so we can see a preview of the work we've done so far. So you can see that our player is, I'll make this bigger. Our player is going through their idle. If I push the arrow keys right now, our player doesn't have the other animation set up. That's fine. That's fine because I'm gonna show you how to set them up. So I'm gonna click here to go out of here. Okay, one of the things you might have noticed is our character isn't standing right as far as the ground right here. So we can fix that fairly easily. I'm going to click on player. I'm going to double click on player. We want to scroll down. We're going to go to edit hitboxes. It's important, by the way, that these two settings are to the right, where this share same collision mask for all animations is set to the right. So like this is saying, yes, do that. Same thing here, share same collision mask for all sprites of this animation. You want these to be to the right or this won't work right. So what we want to do is I'll show you why our character isn't sitting right. This is our hitbox, right? So our character is sitting right on this line right here. So we want to adjust this. So the way we can adjust it is we can click use a custom collision mask. And then after clicking that, now we want to click this plus button to the right. So now we'll scroll up and we see these 4 dots right here. And this lets us drag out a new hitbox. So what you want to do is drag these dots down so that they're covering your character. You want to make it so that they are above this line right here. See that point right there? I'm going to actually make that slightly higher. So that's about where you want this to be on. And basically what's going to happen is this will make it look like the character is actually standing on the ground. So with that, with those 2 dots moved, we're going to take these, pull these up. And we're pulling this up just to make sure that our character is covered by the hitboxes, and the whole character doesn't have to be covered. Okay, so with that done, we'll scroll down, we'll click close, then we'll click apply. Okay, now with that done, when we click our preview button, our character is in the right position. Now our character is behind this. That's easily fixed. So we're going to click this X button to go out of the preview button. And what that is when we click on our character here, see this Z order? The closer to 0 or 1 that this Z order is, the further the object is in the background. We're going to change this to 4 for our player. We'll change this to 2. It's on 2. So now with this being set for 2, as well as this being set for 4, this will now be in front of this object. So let's click the preview button again. Now you can see it looks like our character is actually standing on this ground right here. Okay, we're going to set up now for the player to be animated now, because if I click the preview button now, while the character is standing correctly, the character doesn't turn. The character moves, but the character animation doesn't respond. The only animation we see is this idle animation. So we'll go through this fairly quickly. I'm going to click on this new scene events here. And then what we want to do now is click this first button right here that says add new empty event. We're going to click right here. And when we click right here, we have this blue line underneath our condition as well as our action. What we want to do is this is going to be our main event right here. We want to make 4 sub events. And after I set this up, I'll explain this. So I'm going to go to here to sub event. I'm going to click this 4 times. Now with this still clicked on, which is our first empty event, I'm going to click this add a new empty event. So now we have this set up. We have all of these empty conditions, actions, sub events, basically what we need to set up at least a movement to our character. And we'll go through this and then we'll get to the main part of this tutorial, which is in dealing with the water. Okay, in Gdevelop, this is basically how we program things. Condition, well, this is an event here. An event is made up of a condition as well as an action. A condition basically says when something happens, and then the action says what to do when that something happens. So what we want to do is go to this first condition, and then click add condition. We're going to go down to platform behavior. We're going to click here, and then we're going to click is on the floor. We're going to click player. And now with that set up, we're going to click OK. So we're saying when the player is on the floor, we want something to be done. The reason why we have these things right here, these sub events, is because the sub events are dependent on the main event. And basically what that means is these conditions here, these sub events with these conditions know that the player is on the floor. Okay, so what we want to do here is go to add condition. We're going to go down to platform behavior, and then we're going to click is moving. We're going to select player. Since the player is the thing that's moving, we're going to click OK. Now what we want to do is, the reason why we're doing all this is we're setting up the animation for our player to move. So we're saying when the player is on the floor as well as moving, we want Gdevelop to do something. So we're going to click add action, and what we want it to do is to have the player walk. So we're going to go to sprite, animations and images, and then change the animation by name. We're going to select player as the object that we're working with, and now what we're going to do is we're going to put quotation walk in Gdevelop. If there's certain words in Gdevelop that you get from Gdevelop, and then there's words that you type in. Most of the time, if you type in a word, you're going to need to put quotations around it. So since we typed in to name the animation walk, we put quotations around this. So now we're going to click OK. So now we have this set up so that when the player's on the ground as well as moving, the Gdevelop should show that the player is set up to walk. Now, one of the nice things about Gdevelop is we can copy and paste things to make things faster. So we pretty much have to tell the Gdevelop what to do when the player is not moving. Now that we're saying when the player is moving, walk, we need to tell it what to do when it's not moving. So what we're going to do is right-click, select copy. We're going to left-click here. And we left-clicked. It's important that you notice that this blue line is right here. Hovering over here, I'm going to right-click and select paste. So now we pasted what we copied right here. And the reason why this is useful is now we can just double-click here, change this to invert. So in Gdevelop, instead of saying, one thing says player is moving, instead of saying player is not moving, we just click invert. And invert is the opposite of the player moving. So that's how things work as far as saying the player is not moving. So we're going to click OK. So now we have this set animation of player to walk. This is useful because now all we have to do is come in here to where we see walk and change this to idle. Now, if you're saying like, where am I getting this from? When we have the player here, if I double click here, remember we came in here and we named this first animation idle. We typed this in, and then we typed in walk. We also typed in jump. So that's where I'm getting these things from. So Gdevelop, when I'm typing the names in, it's looking to the animations that are associated with the different names that we put up here. So I'm going to click back on here. So I want to change this to the idle animation. Now I can double click to go inside here. However, I can click here and just type in idle. So now we have this set up for the walk. Now we need things set up for one of the things that's interesting, like when you're doing this, you're like, okay, it's set up. Well, we need to set it up so that Gdevelop knows when we change direction, how things should look. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to click the preview button right here. And then we can see our character is walking correctly there. And when we let go, I'm pressing the arrow keys, by the way, our character is walking forward. But when I push this way, our character doesn't change directions. So that's fairly easy to deal with. One of the nice things is because we're not actually typing code, it's fairly quick. It's also easy for an artist to understand. So what we're going to do is go to this sub event right here. We see add condition. We're going to left click here. We're going to look for a keyboard. And I like how things are laid out here where they kind of make sense once you know what's, kind of how things work. So we want to click key pressed. We want the left key, as in left arrow key. So what we're going to do is type in LEFT. This pops up, and this is saying, is this what you want? Left, that is what we want. So we're going to left click there. Then we're going to click OK. So now we're saying, remember, the condition says, when something happens, action says what to do. So we want the player to flip horizontally. So what we're going to do is we're going to click action. We're going to go to sprite, effects, and then we're going to go to flip the object horizontally. And the object that we want to work with is the player. So now we have this thing that says activate flipping. So our character is faced towards the left. So because the character is faced towards the left and we're setting up to push towards the left, remember, left is already working. Left works correctly. So we don't have to have the character flip because the character is facing to the left. So we're going to click no. Then we're going to click OK. Now what's nice about this is we have this set up. We need to do the same thing for the right arrow key. So with this line going around here, and the reason why I'm telling you this is if I click, like you're like, why is he saying the blue line right here? See if I click here, see how the line is going around this and not here? All right, so when I click here, this is different than clicking here. When I first started using Gdevelop, I was trying to do a tutorial and I had it here, and what I was trying to do didn't work. Just like now, you need to have this line here for this to work. See that? So now what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this information and paste this here. We're going to change this to right key is pressed, and then we're going to have this say flip player yes. So what we're going to do is right click here. Now notice I'm right clicking in this white right here. I'm going to click copy. I'm going to click here. So now I have that blue line there. Now I'm going to right click and select paste. So now we have this copied from here. The reason why that's nice is we can click here. We don't even have to go inside of this option. And then we can type in right. Gdevelop says this is what you want. That's what we want. So we're going to left click there. And then for this flip the player horizontally, activate flipping, we want this to be yes. Because remember, when we went right, that's when things need to be flipped. So now we have that set up. So that is good. Okay, so almost everything is done. We need to set up for the player jumping. So now we're going to go to this. This is a regular event. And the reason why this is separate from this, the reason why this is separate is we don't want this to go along with this players on the floor. These are underneath here because these are helped out by the fact that this first event says players on the floor. So we don't have to say that again and again and again for each one of these, right? We don't want this event to say players on the floor. We want this one to say players jumping. So we're going to click add condition. We're going to go to platform behavior. We're looking for add is jumping. We're going to click there. The object we want to work with is the player. So now we're going to click OK. So we have that set up. Now what we want to do is we want to set up an animation for jumping. So what we'll do is we'll click here. We'll right click, select copy. Come down here, hover right over these words right here. And the reason why we're hovering over the words where before we wanted to copy both of these things. Now we just want to copy. We just want to copy that. So we're going to hover right over these words, right click and select paste. We did this to save time because now we can click here and we can just change this word to jump. And with that, we should be good for setting up our character animations. Okay, so let's test this out. So we're going to click the preview button. Click that to maximize. So now when we push to the left, our character walks. We push to the right, our character walks. Character is even the idle position. Looks, it's facing the right direction. When we press the space bar, our character jumps. So we are good as far as our character animation. Okay, so now that we have all of this set up, I'm going to click here. So we have that blue line there. I'm going to go to right here, which is our add comment. I'm going to click here just so this is separated. This arrow here, if I click this, all of these things will be collapsed. We don't need to look at that now since we already have that done. I'm going to click here. And now I'm going to click here. So this is a new event. And for this event, what we're going to do is we're going to start to set up and bring in the objects we need to work as far as our water. Okay, we need to add 2 objects in. So we're going to go to new scene. So we're going to set up our art assets here. I'm going to move our player up. I'm going to move our ground to here. One of the ways we can have the same size and shape of an object is we can make sure we're left clicked on the object and then right click on the object, click copy, and then right click, click paste. So I want another object right here. Now these are instances, they're really not objects. These are instances of this ground. We need to bring in 2 objects. So we're going to click here. One of those is water. So we're going to go to sprite, left click here. We're going to name this water. There we go. Okay, so we're going to click the plus button here. Now we're going to go to edit with Piskel. We're going to click on our color here. We're going to go for some more, so our character is blue, more greenish type border. So when I click in here, by the way, I left click and drag seems to work a little better than just left clicking. I'm going to click here. I don't have to change the name here. I'm just doing it because it's fairly easy to do. So I'm going to click save. Okay, so as far as behaviors, we don't need any behaviors on this water. It is what it is. So now we're going to click apply. We're going to click here now. We're going to click another sprite. We're going to name this ladder. And then we're going to click the plus button, edit with Piskel. We're going to click on this color here. I'm going to go to a yellowish color. I'm going to click the paintbrush, click here. I'm going to name this ladder, click save, and then I'm going to click apply. Okay, so what we're going to do now with this water is we're going to left click on the water. We have that selected. Now we're going to left click and drag this out. What we're going to do is click this square right here, drag this so it's covering here. We want to have this so the land is above the water, the ground I mean. We're going to pull this down like this. Actually, before we do that, I want to click here, and the water, we want this to be, okay, we want the water to be covering everything else. So the water, set that for 8. I'm just picking 8. It's the closer you get to 1, the further you go into the background. If you like, you're imagining looking towards the screen, the higher you get up in the number, the closer you come towards the screen, if that makes sense to you. So yeah, we have this set for 8, so we're going to pull this down to cover this up. Okay, so now that we have this set up, what we're trying to do is we want to have the player jump into the water, and as the player jumps into the water, the player will move slower. The player will gravity will act different for the player. So with this set up, what we're going to do is click to new events, and now we're going to set up the programming for the water. I'm going to go to preview so you can see, so it makes sense, some of the things that we have to do. Okay, so this, our player should be standing. Oh, I think our player is not standing on there because of the water. So actually, let's go to new event. Let's take the water down some like that. Let's go to okay. Let's deal with that. Our player. Oh, I see. This got changed to 8. Let's change this back to 2. So now let's click. Must have clicked on the wrong thing. There we go. Okay, so our water was fine. So let me click. Get that back up. Okay, what I wanted to show you was when I click the preview button, our player, when the player goes in the water, you can't see the player. Okay. Generally, the player is covered up. So what we want to do is we want to deal with that. So we're going to click here. The way things work here is this condition says when something happens, do this. So the condition says when, and then the action says what to do. If you want something to be done all the time, you leave this empty. What we want to do is set the opacity for the water. So what we're going to do is click Add Action. We're going to go to Sprite. We're going to go to Visibility. We're going to go to Change Sprite Opacity. The object that we want to work with is the water. The modification sign is equal. 0 equals not seeing the water at all. 255 means seeing the water totally. So what we want to do is click here and change this to 150. We'll then click OK. Now when we click play, we can see that our water is transparent. When our player goes in the water, the player, you can see the player. I was just saying the player went through the floor there, so it's kind of funny there. So I'm going to click here. Let's take this. Like that. I was kind of surprised the player went through. So that's what I'm thinking right here. I was thinking the player would stop at the bottom. I move this off to the side. Click here. Player walks. Oh, okay. Yeah, because the player has nothing to stand on. So what we'll do is we'll take this all the way across. Bring in our water like this. And our water has the code on it so that the water, you can see through it. Okay, so we have the water so that it's transparent. Now we need to have the effects change of the water. So what we want to do is have a new event. I'm going to click here, so this is blue. Click here to make another event. We need to have when the player collides with the water for something to happen. So that's what we need to tell Gdevelop. So we're going to click here. We're going to go to Common Conditions for All, Collision, Collision. We're going to select Player. Then we're going to select Water. So we're saying when the player collides with the water, we want something to happen. And now we have to tell Gdevelop what we want to happen. So we want things to change. So what we're going to do is we're going to click Add Action. We're going to go down to Platform Behavior. There we go. Options. What we want is we want to work with gravity. So it says change the gravity applied to an object. So that is the player. So then we're going to click equal to. And then for this setting, what we're going to do is we are going to set this to 200. And then I'm going to click OK. Okay, so why did I set this to 200? The regular gravity for the player for the platform is 1,000. Okay, so the regular gravity is 1,000. so the player would fall faster in the air. So now with the player being in collision with the water, with this, the regular being 1,000, us setting this to 200, we made it so when the player collides with the water, the player should fall a lot slower. So here's the player jumping. You can see how the player falls in the air. So now we'll have the player jump in the water. And what's happening is our player is being affected by the gravity all of the time. So the player is able to jump out of the water. So we don't want that. Okay, so how do we deal with that? Well, the way we deal with that is we need to, let me click this again. So our player's fallen here. That's interesting. Oh, I get it. Because, okay, so this is just gravity. We need falling speed as well. I was trying to think like what's going on. So what we need to do is we need to click here. So see we have the blue here. This is when the player is in collision with the water. We need to set things up so when the player is not in collision with the water. So I'm going to right click, select copy, left click here. So we have this blue on both sides of here. Right click, then select paste. Okay, actually we are going to need this. We don't want this yet. So I'm going to delete these. Because I realize there's a more efficient way to do things. And basically what's going on is we're going to have to copy basically everything here to here. So we might as well do the work here and then just copy this whole thing right to here and then make the changes to here. So we set this to 200. The actual speed for this is 1,000. I know that because I have a notebook sitting right next to me. What we're going to do is we need gravity, we need the maximum falling speed, we need the maximum speed as well as the jump speeds. We need 3 more actions. So what we're going to do is right click, select copy, then we're going to hover right over these words, select paste. I'm right clicking and then left clicking paste, right clicking and then left clicking paste. All right. So for this, we want this to be maximum falling speed. So I'm going to left click here. Go down, I'm going to select maximum falling speed. And we're not going to be concerned about the numbers right now. We now need the maximum speed, so I'm going to left click here. I'm going to select maximum speed, then click OK. We now need the jump speed, so I'm going to left click here, scroll down, then I'm going to select the jump speed, and then click OK. Okay, so now that we have the gravity speed, the maximum falling speed, the maximum speed as well as the jump speed, and we need these things because this is what's going to make the water seem like water. So what we want to do is copy this whole thing to here just to save us some time. So when I left click here, we have this blue line up here as well as here showing that we have this whole thing selected. So we're going to right click here. When I say here, I mean near the bottom, right above that blue line. I'm going to click copy. Then I'm going to left click here so we have this blue line going around these 2 blocks here. Then I'm going to right click and select paste. So now we have all of this again here. And we need to do some changes here, but this saved us the time of having to do this again as well as this again. So the numbers that we need here, we have 200. We need this to be changed to 100. So we're going to click here. And we're changing these numbers so that when the player goes in the water, the falling speed, the maximum speed, the jump speed, as well as the gravity is changed. That's the main thing that makes the player seem like the player's in water. So we're going to change this to 100. And then for the jump speed, we want this to be at 200. So these are the settings for when the player is in collision with the water. We're going to double click here and we're going to click this invert condition. So this is going to basically be the settings for when the player is not in collision with the water. So we're going to click OK. Then we're going to put in these numbers. For the gravity, we want this to be 1,000. I'm looking at the notebook I have here. And these are the default settings, by the way. The maximum speed, we want this to be 700. At a maximum falling speed. The maximum speed of the player, we want this to be 250. The jump speed we want to be 600. Okay, so now with all of that done, I'm going to click the preview button. Okay, so as our player walks here, notice the speed that the player is walking at. When I press jump, the falling speed, right? So now I'm about to jump into the water. And now you can see the falling speed. You can also see the speed that the player is walking at. So the player is responding like they're in water, which is what we want. However, there are some things that we need to do, because if we want our player to get up out of the water, right now our player can only jump one time. So we're going to work on that now. Okay, the way we're going to allow the player to be able to get out of the water is we're going to add a variable. Think of a variable as just a holder of information. The variable can hold different types of information. The main thing you want to be concerned here is the variable's ability to hold numbers right now. So we're going to click on New Scene. There's multiple ways of making variables in Gdevelop. We're going to go to our player. We're going to go to these three dots. We're going to left click here. And then we're going to go to Edit Object Variables. We're going to left click here. We're then going to go to this plus button to the right. And we're going to name this capital V swim. Put the V there just since it's a variable. We're going to let everything else stay as it is. We're going to click Apply. So now basically we have a holder of information attached specifically to this player. So now we're going to click back on New Scenes and Events. Okay, so now that we have that variable made and attached to the player, what we want to do is we want to have, when the player is in collision with the water, we want that variable to equal to 2. So just imagine the variable being a character holding up a sign saying 2. And whenever that sign 2 is held up, we want certain things to happen. So to have the variable basically equal to, or like my explanation to you holding up a sign saying 2, we need to click Add Action. You need to be very careful here that you don't scroll down and go right to Variables. You want to click Common Action for all objects, because the variables for here and beyond here are different. So you click Common Action for all, then you click variables here, and you'll see modify the variable of in object. You want to click that, and then the variable of the object you want to modify is the player. So you're going to click that. So now the player, you'll click here for the variable. So you click here and you can see this is the variable we made called vSwim, right? So remember, the variable is something that holds information. We're having it hold, in this case, numbers. And I told you to think of it as being like a character holding up a sign, right? We want this sign to say equals 2. So we're going to click equal or set to. And then for the setting here, we're going to select 2. Then we're going to click OK. Okay, so all this is saying is when the player is in collision with the water, the variable will equal 2. So imagine a variable being a character named vSwim, that whenever the player is in collision with the water, that character holds up a sign saying 2. Okay, so when 2 is shown, we want certain things to happen. Now we're about to set another action so that when the when the player is not in the water, that variable, or if you imagine it being like a character, is going to hold up 0, right? So to do this, we can just left click here, right click, select copy, and then right over these letters here, I'm going to right click, select paste, right? So this is the same. We just need to change this setting. So I'm going to click here, and we want this to be 0. you could just press enter or click out like I did. So now when the player is in collision with the water, our variable, or you imagine a character holding up a sign, says 2. When the player is not in the water, our variable, which is really it's a way of holding information, but I don't think it's a bad thing saying imagine a character named vSwim holding up a sign saying 0. When a character holds up a sign saying 2, we want certain things to happen. When the character holds up 0, we want certain things to happen. So right now we're just saying what the character is doing. And again, it's me making an analogy, hopefully one to help you understand, what the variable is doing. So we didn't say what to happen when the variable equals 2 or equals 0. So that's what we are about to do. Okay, the reason we set up the variable in the first place is because we need to have the player be able to get out of the water. So that's the reason why we're even doing that in the first place. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to add condition, because the player jumps, but the player can't jump out of the water. So what we want to do is set something up so that when we press the jump key, we can set up a way for the player to get out of the water. So we're looking for the keyboard. So we're going to click here, and our regular jump set by our platform behavior is space bar. So we're going to left click here, and then we're going to type in SPACE. Here's the space bar here. We'll left click there, and then we'll click OK. Okay, so we have space bars pressed. So when the space bar is pressed, we want something to happen. What do we want to happen? Well, what we want to happen is we want the variable to do something. So I'm going to click here, left click here, right click. I just chose this one over the other one just because I chose this one. I'm going to select copy. I'm going to hover right. Let me click here. I'm going to hover right over these words, and then I'm going to right click paste. So now we have this space bar is pressed, equals 2. We don't want this. We want this to equal 1. So now when the player is in collision with the water, the variable equal 2. Imagine being like a character named vSwim holding up a 2. When a player is not in collision with the water, imagine the player being like a character vSwim holding up a 0. Now when the space bar is pressed, that character will be holding up a 1. So now we just have to tell this, okay, what happens when this variable, or like as I'm describing, a character holds up these numbers, like what to do. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to set up to have the variable do something. So we're going to click add condition, common conditions for all objects. We're going to scroll down to variables. We're going to go to value of an object's variable. The variable is connected to the player. The variable is named vSwim. The sign of the test is going to be greater than, is how we're going to make, basically what we want to happen is when we press a space bar, we want the character to be able to jump multiple times so that the character can get out of the water. We're going to use this greater than to do that. So I'm going to left click on greater than, and then for this setting here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to 0. So then I'm going to click OK. Okay, so basically what is going on here is we're saying when the variable is greater than 0, we want something to happen. So when this is greater than 0, so remember, when the player is in water, this says 2, right? This being the variable says 2. So it's like a character holding up a sign that says 2. So that would be greater than this. So that would happen. This would happen, cause something to happen when the player is in water. And as far as this is when the player is out of the water. The variable would equal 0, or like a character holding up a sign saying 0. So nothing would happen here because this is 0. For whatever we're about to do here, this has to be greater than 0. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to simulate pressing the jump button for our player. So we're going to click add an action. We're going to go down to platform behavior. So it's under controls. We're going to select simulate jump key press. We'll left click there. The object we want to do this for is the player. So then we'll click OK. Okay, so when the variable is greater than 0, we'll simulate pressing jump when the space key is pressed. Now we want to be able to do this more than once, so we're going to go to add an action, platform behavior, controls, okay, so it's not controls, it's options. So it's allow, again, jumping. So we'll left click there. The object is the player. Then we'll click OK. Okay, so when the space key is pressed, we only want this to happen once. So you can push the key, space key down, and you might have it down for a half a second. However, you want that we want Gdevelop to only register that the space key was pressed once. In that half a second, we don't want the space key to be registered as being pressed numerous times. So the way that we do that is we go to Add Condition, we go to Advanced, and then we select Trigger Once While True. So I'm going to left click here. This is fine. And then we'll click, when I say this, I'm talking about these things, that the way they're set up specifically. We're going to click OK. Okay, now with all of this set up, I'm going to click this preview button here. So now I'm pressing the arrow keys. Our character is walking as they should at regular speed. Our character is idling like they should. When I press jump, the character has regular falling speed. Now I'm going to jump in the water. You can see our character has the water falling speed. Our character is walking slower in the water. And now we should be able to press the space key multiple times, and our character is able to get to the top of the water. Now, there's an issue because our character can't get out of the water. Okay, this actually isn't that difficult to deal with. I'm going to go to New Scene. I'm going to left click on Ladder. I'm going to drag this out. I'm going to left click on the ladder, click on this square and drag this to the side to make this thinner. I'm putting this right next to the edge of our ground there. I'm going to double click on ladder, click on behaviors. You can see this purple line underneath, purple outline underneath behaviors. I'm going to click plus. I'm going to go to platforms. We have all these different all these different behaviors. I'm going to select platform. Where we see grab offset on y-axis. Right now this is set for 0. I'm going to change this to 10. And then we see type platform. I'm going to go to this little triangle here. It's kind of difficult to see. I'm going to left click here, and then I'm going to select ladder. Now I'm going to select apply. Okay, so now with that done, I'm going to click the preview button. So our character is walking. I'm going to jump into the water. So now when I repeatedly press the space key and then I come here, if I press the space as well as the up button, now we can jump out of the water. There is still two issues to deal with. One, we don't want this to be here, so we want to hide this. And two, if I walk right off the edge, you see that? How our character is walking as the character goes to the water. Okay, the way we're going to deal with this, we're going to click on New Scene Events. We're going to go to Add Condition. We're going to go to Scene. We're going to select at the beginning of the scene. That information up there is fine. We're going to click OK. We're then going to select Add Action. We're going to go to Common Actions for All. We're going to select Visibility and then select Hide. And then we are going to select Ladder. So I just left click to get that selection around the ladder to go away. Now I'm going to click OK. So now with that done, when I click the preview button, the ladder is still there. So if I jump in the water, then I press up, we still jump out, but we no longer can see the ladder. Okay, now we just need to set things up so that our character doesn't continue to walk as they go into the water. So we have our condition that says that when the player's in collision with the water, do these things right here. So we'll go to add action, and we will add another action that says when the player's in is in collision with the water, go into a jump animation. The way we're going to do that is we're going to select sprite, animations and images. We're going to go down to change the animation by name. The object we're working with is the player. The animation name is jump. So I'm going to hold shift to put in a quotation, put in jump, and then hold shift to put in another quotation. I'm then going to click OK. Okay, so now we're going to click the preview button. So now our character walks back and forth like they should. I'm going to jump into the water. Character sinks. Hey, wait a second. Oh, I see that. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so now our character goes to the bottom, and our character doesn't walk because we have that set to jump animation. So I'm going to click here to come out of our preview window. Okay, the way we can deal with this is I'm going to left click here. See, we have this blue line right here. That's important because I want to make a new event. So I'm going to left click here. I'm going to go to players in collision with water. I'm going to left click here, right click, and then select copy. I'm then going to hover right over these words where we see add condition. I'm going to right click, select paste. And then where we have this set animation of player to jump, I'm going to left click here, right click, then select cut. I'm then going to right click over add action and then paste. And what we want to do is have this only trigger once. So we're going to click add condition, advanced, and then trigger once while true. So I'm going to left click here. Those settings up top are okay. So since they're okay, I'm going to click OK. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to click the preview button. So our character walks back and forth fine. The character jumps fine. The character jumps into the water. The character is walking fine. Character gets out of the water fine. I'm going to walk into the water. Okay. Okay, guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there that like the videos on this channel and we share them, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel and you would like to see more, please subscribe and thank you for viewing.